You want a wife? Evelyn set the pen down and looked straight at him. Then read my 3 conditions before you touch that contract. Rhett Callahan had not moved. Not 1 inch. No woman in Black Hollow had ever spoken to him that way. Not once in 12 years. You don't give conditions, he said. I do. Then we're done here. She pushed the contract back across the table and reached for her coat. His hand came down flat on top of it. The room went absolutely still, and Rhett Callahan, the most feared rancher in all of Montana, sat back down. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to our channel and follow Evelyn and Rhett all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Evelyn Pierce arrived in Black Hollow, Montana, the sky was the color of a bruised dark purple at the edges, pressed thin and pale above the peaks. She stepped off the stagecoach with one trunk, a leather satchel pressed tight against her ribs, and the specific kind of calm that only comes from a woman who has already survived the worst thing she could imagine. She was not here for romance. She was not here for rescue. She was here because a man she had never met had sent a letter offering her a name, a roof and a monthly wage in exchange for keeping his household in order. And she had said yes, not because she trusted him, but because she had run completely out of other options. Behind her, still on the coach, her younger brother Thomas pressed his face to the window. He was 19 years old and trying very hard not to look afraid. "Is it always this quiet?" he asked, climbing down after her. "I don't know," Evelyn said. "We just got here." "It feels like the kind of quiet that means something bad already happened." Evelyn looked down the main street of Black Hollow. A few storefronts, a post office, a church with a crooked cross, men on horseback moving past without looking at her. A woman sweeping a porch who looked up, saw Evelyn, and looked back down without expression. "Keep your voice low," Evelyn said, "and don't say anything about the contract." "I know. I mean it, Thomas. I said I know." She adjusted the strap of her satchel and started walking toward the address written on the letter. A man named Callahan, Rhett Callahan. The letter had said very little beyond logistics, no warm language, no questions about her, no expressions of hope. Just instructions, a list of expectations, a reminder that the arrangement was practical in nature, and that emotional entanglements were not part of the agreement. She had read it 4 times. Not because she was moved by it, but because she wanted to make sure she understood exactly what she was walking into. She understood. She walked in anyway. The Callahan Ranch was 3 miles outside of town. A hired hand met her at the gate, a quiet older man named Garrett, who said almost nothing, loaded her trunk into a wagon without being asked, and drove her up a long dirt road lined with cottonwood trees. The house itself was large, not elegant, not the kind of house that was built to impress, but solid, heavy, and permanent, in a way that made it clear the man who lived there did not expect to leave. Every board was set right. Every fence post was straight. The barn was well kept. The yard was clean. A working ranch. Serious money, serious discipline. And on the porch, arms crossed hat, pulled low expression that could have been carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him, stood Rhett Callahan. He was taller than she expected, broader through the shoulders. He had the kind of face that had been through weather, not just lived in it, sun-darkened, sharp-cut, with eyes that were a strange light gray, and did not soften when she stepped down from the wagon. He watched her cross the yard without moving. She walked all the way to the porch steps, stopped and looked directly at him. "Mr. Callahan." "Miss Pierce." Silence. Not awkward silence, evaluating silence. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he isn't sure yet is useful or a problem. She let him look. "You're younger than I expected," he said finally. "And you're quieter than your letter suggested," she said, "which I consider a point in your favor." Something moved behind his eyes. Not warmth, more like recalibration. He stepped back from the doorway. "Come inside." So, the sitting room was exactly what she expected from the outside, clean, functional, no decorative objects except a single iron clock on the mantel and a framed survey map of the ranch land on the wall. No curtains with patterns, no family portraits, nothing soft. He gestured to a chair across from him and sat down, and without preamble, he pulled a folded document from inside his jacket and set it on the table between them. "The arrangement is straightforward," he said. "You manage the household, you keep accounts, you appear with me when necessary in town. You don't interfere with ranch operations, you don't discuss my business outside this property, and you don't make demands on my time or my attention. And in return, your brother's debt is cleared. You receive $60 per month. You have a room here, food, medical care if you need it. And the term, 1 year, renewable if both parties agree." Evelyn looked at the document. She could see it had been written by a lawyer. Dense language, tight clauses, very little room for interpretation. She had seen contracts like this before. Her father used to bring them home, and she would read them while he slept because someone had to. She picked up the pen. She signed. And then she slid the contract back across the table and placed her hand flat on top of it. "I have 3 conditions," she said. Rhett looked at her hand, then at her face. "The document is signed. By me, not yet by you." She met his eyes. "3 conditions, Mr. Callahan. Simple ones." The silence stretched. He did not pick up the pen. He did not lean forward. But he didn't stand up either. "Say them." "First, my brother works on this ranch if he chooses to. He earns a real wage, not charity. He answers to your foreman like anyone else. That's manageable. Second, I have access to all household accounts. All of them. Not summaries, not reports. The actual books." A pause. Something shifted in his jaw. "Why?" "Because I cannot manage a household I cannot see. And because if I am to be responsible for the functioning of this property, I will not do it blind." He watched her for a long moment. "And the third, you don't lie to me," she said, "about anything that affects this house, this arrangement, or my brother's safety. I don't need the truth about your feelings or your history. I don't need you to be kind. But I need you to be honest." The clock on the mantel ticked. Rhett Callahan picked up the pen. He signed the document. He capped the pen and set it down carefully, and then he looked at her with those gray eyes that gave nothing away and said, "You're going to be trouble." "No," Evelyn said, tucking her copy of the contract into her satchel. "I'm going to be useful. Those are different things." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and looked at the door. "I'd like to see the kitchen now. And the accounts ledger when it's convenient." Rhett said nothing for a moment. Then he stood and walked her to the kitchen. Hetty was the cook, a stout woman in her 50s, with flour on her apron, and the particular expression of someone who had survived multiple difficult employers and had stopped expecting things to improve. She looked Evelyn up and down when Rhett introduced her, gave one short nod, and went back to her dough. "You'll want to talk to Garrett about supplies," Hetty said without looking up. "He's the one who orders, but he doesn't keep proper count. Half the time we run short on flour by the 3rd week, and he can't explain why." "I'll speak with him," Evelyn said. "And the linens need replacing in the east rooms. I've been saying it for 2 years." "Noted." Hetty finally looked up. She studied Evelyn for a moment, something measured and private in her expression, and then she said, "You cook." "Yes." "Well enough to help, or well enough that you'll make a mess and disappear?" "Well enough to help." Hetty went back to her dough. "Fine then." It was not a warm welcome, but it was an honest one. Evelyn understood that it was probably the best she was going to get from anyone on this ranch for a while. She asked for the accounts ledger at dinner. Rhett looked at her across the long table, just the 2 of them, Thomas having been shown to the bunkhouse for the time being, and said, "Tomorrow." "You said when it was convenient." "Tomorrow is convenient." Evelyn picked up her fork. "All right." They ate in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Evelyn had learned long ago that silence was not the enemy. The enemy was pretending things were fine when they were not. The enemy was filling quiet with noise just to avoid honesty. She ate her food. She thought about the contracts. Halfway through the meal, Rhett said without looking up, "Why did you really come here?" "I told you in my letter." "You told me about the debt. I'm asking about the rest." She set down her fork. She looked at him. He was still looking at his plate, but she could see the line of his shoulders the way they had tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thomas had no one else," she said. "He was 19 with a dead father's creditors at the door and a job at a mill that paid him barely enough to eat. I had skills and no prospects in any city that would use them. Your offer was real, so I came." "You weren't afraid?" "I was afraid. I came anyway." He looked up then. That gray gaze direct and unreadable. "Most women I wrote to asked about the house," he said. "The furnishings, the town, whether there was a church." "I asked about the accounts," Evelyn said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but something. "Yes," he said. "You did." The accounts ledger arrived the next morning. Garrett brought it to her without making eye contact and set it on the kitchen table like a man surrendering a weapon he had hoped to keep hidden. She opened it, and within 30 minutes she had found 4 irregularities. They were not dramatic, not yet, but they were consistent. Small discrepancies in the supply tallies. Feed orders that didn't match the number of animals on the property count. A payments record to a vendor in Billings that appeared twice in different months for the same services. She sat with her coffee and went through the pages slowly, methodically, the way her father had taught her. Not looking for drama, looking for patterns. By noon, she had a list. She brought it to Rhett in the barn where he was checking one of the horses. He looked at the paper she handed him, and his expression didn't change, but he went very still. "Where did you find this?" "In the ledger you gave me." "Garrett keeps those accounts." "I know." She folded her hands in front of her. "I'm not making accusations. I'm showing you what I found. What you do with it is your business." He looked at the list again. Something shifted behind his eyes, slow, heavy, like a door being forced open after a long time shut. "How long?" he said. "Based on the pattern, at least 14 months, possibly longer. There are earlier records I haven't seen. I'll need the older books." "I thought you might." She paused. "Garrett doesn't know I've found this." "Good." Rhett folded the list and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at her directly. "You said you weren't going to interfere with ranch operations." "This is a household account," Evelyn said, "which falls under my jurisdiction per our agreement." He stared at her. She waited. "You are going to be a great deal of trouble," he said again, and this time she thought it might have been something close to a compliment. Word moved fast in Black Hollow. By the end of that first week, the town knew that Rhett Callahan had taken a wife or something close to one, and opinions varied widely. The women at the general store gave Evelyn careful sideways looks when she came in for household supplies. Some of them smiled with only their mouths. Others were simply direct. One woman, a Mrs. Albright, touched her arm near the thread display and said very quietly, "He's not a bad man, but he isn't easy. You understand what I mean?" "I think I do," Evelyn said. "He lost people," Mrs. Albright said, and then she stopped there as if she had said too much and moved away. Evelyn bought her thread and her flour and drove back to the ranch and didn't ask about it. Not that day. Thomas found his footing faster than she expected. He was put to work with the younger ranch hands. Fence repair feed, runs basic carpentry, and within 4 days he had made 2 things abundantly clear. He was not afraid of hard work, and he had a natural instinct for horses that the foreman, a man named Cord, noticed and mentioned to Rhett by the end of the first week. "Your wife's brother has good hands with the animals," Cord told Rhett, loud enough that Evelyn heard it from the doorway. "Good," Rhett said. "Might want to put him on the mare that's been running shy." "Fine." Thomas appeared in the kitchen that evening with his eyes bright and his shirt muddy and a new kind of energy running through him that Evelyn had not seen in over a year. "Cord said I have good instincts," Thomas said. "Don't let it go to your head." He said it in front of 3 other hands. "Thomas, I'm just saying." He sat down at the table. His voice went quieter. "Evie, this might actually work." She looked at him, really looked at him. At the boy who had been white-knuckled with fear on the stagecoach 5 days ago, and who was sitting here now with mud on his collar and confidence in his voice. "1 week," she said gently. "Keep working." "I know." He paused. "What's he like, Callahan?" She considered the question honestly. "He's exacting. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. He's harder to read than most people." Another pause. "But he kept his word about your wage. I checked this morning." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's something." "Yes," she said. "It is." 10 days into her time at Black Hollow, Evelyn found the payroll discrepancy. It was larger than the supply irregularities, significantly larger. A wage listed for a man named Dale Pruitt, who, according to the ranch's labor log, had left Callahan employ 8 months ago. The wage had continued to be drawn every 2 weeks since pulling directly from the operating account. She did the arithmetic twice. Then she went to find Rhett. He was in his office, a spare room off the back of the house, with a desk, 2 chairs, and that survey map on the wall that she was beginning to understand was the closest thing he had to a personal statement. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She put the payroll ledger on his desk and pointed to the entry without speaking. He looked at it, his jaw set. "Dale Pruitt hasn't worked here since March," he said. "I know. He's been paid 12 times since then." Rhett stood up slowly. He went to the door of the office and said, "Cord?" Cord appeared within 2 minutes, a man who Evelyn had quickly understood was one of the few people on this ranch Rhett actually trusted. "Who handles payroll submissions?" Rhett asked. Cord looked at the ledger. Something passed across his face, fast and controlled. "Garrett submits the slips to Billings for processing. And the approval goes through the house account ledger, which Garrett—" Cord stopped. "Which Garrett also maintains," Rhett said quietly. The 3 of them stood in the heavy silence of that understanding. "How much?" Cord asked, looking at Evelyn. "Over 8 months at the standard rate, just under $400, she said. Cord let out a slow breath. Rhett turned to him. "Say nothing. Don't change your behavior around him. I want to see how far back this goes before we move." Cord nodded. Rhett looked at Evelyn. Something in his expression had changed. Not softened exactly, but opened like a window cracked in a room that had been sealed for too long. "You found this in 10 days, he said. "The numbers weren't hidden well," she said. "Someone assumed no one would look closely." "No one has. Not in years." She met his eyes. "I look closely at everything, Mr. Callahan. That was in my letter." He was quiet for a moment. "Rhett," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry." "You can call me Rhett." He picked up the ledger. "We're going to be working on this together. Mr. Callahan is too formal for what I'm about to ask you to do." "And what are you about to ask me to do?" He looked at her over the edge of the ledger. "Help me find the rest of it," he said. She found the rest of it over the next 3 days, working every evening after dinner, spreading ledger pages across the kitchen table, while Hetty moved quietly around the edges of the room and said nothing and refilled her coffee without being asked. The numbers told a story. Not a complicated one, but a long one. $400 in ghost wages. $60 in overstated supply orders. Unexplained payments to 2 vendors in towns 60 miles away, who, when Evelyn cross-referenced against the county business directory she'd borrowed from the post office, did not appear to exist. By the end of the 3rd day, she had a full accounting. She brought it to Rhett at 8 o'clock in the evening. He read through her notes without speaking. She sat across from him and drank her coffee and waited. When he looked up, his expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the thing moving underneath it. the slow, quiet burn of a man who had been betrayed by someone he trusted. "How much total?" he said. "Conservatively, over 2 years, approximately $900. Possibly more, if there are records I haven't been shown." $900. On a working ranch, that was not a catastrophic sum. But it was not nothing. And it was the kind of number that said this was deliberate. This was planned. This was someone who had calculated how much could be taken without tripping an alarm. "Garrett's been with this ranch for 6 years, Rhett said. "I know. He was here before I took ownership. He came with the property." "I know that too." He set the papers down. He pressed his hands flat on the desk. He breathed out through his nose, slow and controlled. "I trusted him," he said, not dramatically, just as a fact. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I'm sorry." Rhett looked at her. "Don't be sorry. You found it." A pause. "What would you recommend?" She had already thought about this. "Confront him privately. Give him the opportunity to explain himself before you involve the law. If the explanation is insufficient, and it will be made clear that he leaves quietly, and the missing funds are treated as a debt he repays over time, or you file a formal complaint with the county sheriff." "You don't think we should go directly to the sheriff?" "I think quiet resolution is better for the ranch's reputation. A theft prosecution means public testimony, and public testimony means your competitors know exactly how your accounts were managed." She paused. "It's your decision, but that's my assessment." He studied her for a long, unhurried moment. "How old are you?" he said. 27. "Where did you learn to think like this?" "My father was a bookkeeper," she said. "And then he wasn't, and someone had to be." Something moved across his face, brief and private, and then it was gone. "All right," he said. "We do it your way." Garrett was confronted the following morning in Rhett's office with the door closed. Evelyn was not present for that meeting. She had made her case, laid out the evidence, and it was not her role to be in the room for the reckoning. She stayed in the kitchen and worked through a new inventory system. She was building a proper one, organized by category, cross-referenced against the supply orders, something that would prevent exactly this kind of quiet hemorrhage in the future. Hetty set a plate of biscuits on the table without a word. 40 minutes later, Garrett left through the back of the house with his hat pulled low and did not look in the kitchen's direction. An hour after that, Rhett appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked tired. Not broken, just worn through the way a man looks when something he already half knew has been finally confirmed out loud. "He admitted to most of it," Rhett said. "Most? Claims the vendor payments were sanctioned by the previous owner, and he continued them out of habit. I don't believe him, but I can't prove otherwise without older records." "I'd like to see the older records." He almost smiled. "I assumed you would." He paused. "He's leaving tonight. He'll repay what he can." Another pause. "I offered him the choice you suggested." "Was that difficult?" Rhett looked at the window. 6 years is a long time to trust someone." "Yes," she said. "It is." Hetty, without turning from the stove, said, "Biscuits are getting cold." Rhett looked at the plate on the table. He pulled out the chair across from Evelyn and sat down heavily and reached for a biscuit. It was, Evelyn realized, the first time he had sat at the kitchen table. She said nothing about it. She poured him a coffee, and they sat in silence. But not empty silence, not frightened silence. The kind of silence that meant something had shifted between two people who had not expected to understand each other and were beginning to slowly and against all prediction understand each other anyway. That night, Thomas knocked on her bedroom door at 10 o'clock. "Garrett's gone," he said. "I know." Cord told the hands it was personal reasons. Nobody seemed surprised. People rarely are when something they sensed is finally confirmed. Thomas leaned against the doorframe. He looked at her carefully. "What did Callahan say to you after—" "Not much. But something." She looked at her brother. "He sat in the kitchen," she said. "That might not mean anything to you, but I don't think he sits in the kitchen." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." You look like you're thinking very hard about something. I'm always thinking very hard about something. He grinned the young, unguarded grin she had missed seeing on his face. Fair point. He pushed off the doorframe. Good night, Evie. Good night. After he left, she went to the window and stood there for a long time, looking out at the dark outline of the mountains and the lit window of Rhett's office, where the lamp was still burning well past midnight. A man who trusted someone for 6 years and had just found out what that trust had cost him. She understood that kind of wound. She understood it better than she had told him. She had her own version of it, and she stood there at the window, not quite ready to name what she was beginning to feel, only knowing that when she had put the coffee cup in front of him at that kitchen table, something in her chest had moved in a way it had not moved in a long time. She was not afraid of that, but she was paying attention to it, which for Evelyn Pierce was the first sign of real danger. The day after Garrett left, Rhett called the full ranch staff together before sunrise. Evelyn stood at the edge of the yard and watched. She had not been asked to attend, but she had not been told to stay inside either, and she had learned in the past 2 weeks that Rhett Callahan operated on a principle of what was not forbidden being permitted. So she stood where she could see, and she listened. Rhett did not raise his voice. He did not make speeches. He told the assembled men, 14 of them ranging from Cord at the front to Thomas near the back, that the household accounts had been restructured, that a new system of supply approval would go into effect immediately, and that any questions about wages or expenditures should now come directly to him or to his wife. His wife. It was the first time he had used that word publicly. 3 men glanced in her direction. Thomas looked at her with his eyebrows slightly raised. She kept her expression even, and her hands folded and her eyes on Rhett. He did not look at her while he said it, but she noticed he did not look away from her direction either. One more thing, Rhett said, and his voice dropped half a register just enough that every man in the yard went a little more still. This ranch has run on loyalty for 12 years. I expect that to continue. Anyone who has a problem with the new arrangements is welcome to settle their pay with Cord and move on. No hard feelings, no questions asked. Silence. Not one man moved. Cord nodded once slowly, and that seemed to settle something for the rest of them. Rhett dismissed them. They moved back to their work without talking the way men do when they understand something serious has been said, and they are processing it privately. Thomas appeared at Evelyn's elbow as the yard cleared. He called you his wife, he said quietly. That's what the contract says. That's not what I mean, and you know it. She turned and walked back to the house. The new supply system took her 4 days to build from scratch. She designed it around a 3-point check. Every order had to be itemized before submission, cross-referenced against the current inventory count, and initialed by both the foreman and herself before any payment was issued. It was not complicated. It was the kind of system any competent bookkeeper would have put in place from the beginning, but no one had, and the reason no one had was that it requires someone who is genuinely interested in the truth of the numbers rather than their appearance. Cord adapted to it without complaint. He was a practical man, the kind who understood that a good system made his own job easier and protected him from being blamed for things he hadn't done. The 2 younger hands who handled supply runs were more resistant. One of them, a man named Bo, showed up at the kitchen door on the 3rd day with a supply list and a look on his face that said he had opinions he had not yet decided whether to express. Mrs. Callahan, he said. Bo, this new form, it's got a lot of steps. It has 3 steps, she said. Which one is giving you trouble? He looked at the form. The count verification. I'd have to go back to the barn and check the grain levels before I can fill this out. Yes. That's an extra trip. It is. She looked at him directly. The previous system cost this ranch $400 over 8 months because no one was making that extra trip. So yes, you'll make the extra trip. Bo stood there for a moment. He was a young man, maybe 22, and he had the look of someone who had just been spoken to honestly for the first time in a while and was not entirely sure how to feel about it. Yes, ma'am, he said finally, and turned around. Hetty at the stove made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Don't encourage him," Evelyn said. "Wasn't encouraging him," Hetty said. "Was encouraging you." The first real resistance came from a man named Doyle. He was the ranch's head livestock manager, mid-40s, built like a fence post, with the particular confidence of a man who had never been accountable to anyone who wasn't named Callahan, and sometimes not even then. He had been on the property longer than Cord. He had his own set of keys to the equipment barn. He did not come to Evelyn about his accounts. He submitted them directly to Cord, who passed them to Rhett, who had never looked at them closely. Evelyn noticed this on day 16. She went to Cord, the livestock operating budget, who reviews it. Cord looked at her with the careful expression of a man who knew the answer was going to cause him trouble. "Doyle submits monthly. To you? To me then, to Rhett. Has Rhett been reviewing them personally?" A pause. "There's a lot on his plate." Cord. "No," Cord said. "Not closely. Doyle's been here a long time. He stopped himself. "He's trusted," Evelyn said. Cord said nothing. She asked for the livestock accounts that afternoon. Cord brought them to her without a word. She spent that evening going through 2 years of records, and by 10 o'clock, she had found something that made her sit very still for a moment before she wrote it down. The cattle head count submitted for insurance purposes was consistently higher than the actual count recorded in the ranch's internal logs. Not by a dramatic margin, 7 to 12 animals per quarter. But insurance on cattle was calculated by head. And if you were claiming 12 more animals than you actually had, the difference in premium calculations over 2 years would represent a very specific kind of fraud. Not theft from Rhett. Fraud against the insurance company. Which meant, if it was ever discovered, it was not Doyle who would face the consequences. It was Rhett. She went to him at 11 o'clock that night. His office light was still on. She knocked once and pushed the door open without waiting, which she had never done before, and she could tell by the way he looked up that he registered the difference. She put the livestock ledger on his desk and pointed to the column she had marked. "Read the head counts," she said. "Both columns." He looked. He was quiet for a long moment. "How long?" he said. "At least 2 years, possibly from the beginning of his tenure." Rhett pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. "Tell me what you think is happening," she told him. Clearly without drama, laying out the math and the implication and the legal exposure with the same calm she would use to explain a supply order. She watched his face while she talked, watched the way it went from controlled to very controlled, which on Rhett Callahan was the equivalent of another man turning white. When she finished, he said, "He's not stealing from me." "No, he's using your name to steal from someone else. Which is worse." "Why worse?" "Because when it comes apart, and it will, you're the one holding the ranch. You're the one whose signature is on the insurance policy. Doyle walks away with whatever he's collected. You answer for the fraud." Rhett stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides, very still. She waited. "2 of them," he said finally. "In 16 days. I know. Either this ranch has been hemorrhaging money for years, or I have been—" He stopped. "Not paying attention to the right things," she said carefully. "You've been managing the land, the herd, the operations. You trusted the people you put around you to manage the rest. I trusted badly. You trusted normally. Most people do." She paused. "The difference is that most people don't have someone looking at the numbers." He turned from the window. He looked at her directly, and she could see something working behind those gray eyes, something bigger than anger, more complicated than embarrassment, something that was working its way toward an understanding he had not expected to reach. "How did you know to look at the livestock accounts?" he said. "I didn't tell you to." "You gave me access to all the books," she said. "I took you at your word." He was quiet. "Rhett." She said his name deliberately the first time she had used it without hesitation. We need to handle Doyle carefully. The insurance company cannot find out there's a discrepancy before you've corrected the records and reported the error yourself. If they find it independently, it looks deliberate. You're telling me to report my own ranch for fraud. I'm telling you to get ahead of it. Self-reporting with documentation of what happened and who was responsible is the difference between a fine and a criminal charge. She held his gaze. I'll help you write the report if you want. I've seen how this kind of thing goes. He stared at her. When have you seen this kind of thing before? A brief silence. My father, she said. Different situation. Same ending when no one caught it in time. She didn't say more than that. She didn't need to. Rhett nodded. Once, slowly. Draft the report, he said. I'll review it in the morning. She picked up the ledger. I'll need 2 hours. It's already midnight. Then I'll need 2 hours. He watched her walk toward the door, and then he said quietly, so quietly she almost missed it. Evelyn. She stopped. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like something it isn't, he said. So I'll just say it plainly. This ranch would have been in serious trouble within a year, without you seeing what I didn't. And I want you to know I understand that. She stood with her back still half turned to him. That's what you're paying me for, she said. I'm not paying you for this, he said. This is beyond what I asked of you. She looked at him over her shoulder. Then consider it a gesture of good faith, she said. And get some sleep. We both have a long day tomorrow. She went back to the kitchen table, lit the lamp, and opened her notebook. She did not let herself think about the way his voice had sounded when he said her name. Not yet. Doyle was confronted at 7 the following morning. Evelyn was not in the room for that conversation either, but this time she heard it because Rhett's office door did not fully close, and Doyle was not a quiet man when cornered. That woman went through my accounts. Doyle's voice came through the gap, low and furious. That's not her business. Those are operational records. She's a household manager. Rhett's response was quiet enough that she couldn't make out the words, but she heard the tone flat, precise, the kind of voice that does not rise because it doesn't need to. I've been doing this for 9 years. Doyle again. 9 years without a problem, and you're going to take her word over mine. More quiet words from Rhett. The counts are approximate. You know how cattle are. Animals die, calves are born. The numbers shift. I was rounding. Then, Rhett's voice, and this time she caught every word. You were rounding in one direction, Doyle, consistently, for 8 quarters. I have the report in my hand. Don't tell me that's rounding. A long silence. When Doyle spoke again, his voice had changed. Lower, stripped of the bluster. What happens now? You leave, Rhett said. Today, before noon. I'll give you a reference that says you managed livestock competently for 9 years, which is the truth, and I won't include what else is true. In exchange, you'll sign a statement of what you did, and why, which I'll use as documentation for my self-report to the insurance company. A statement. An honest one. And if I don't, then I call the sheriff this afternoon and you explain yourself to him instead. Another long silence. Doyle left before 9 o'clock. He walked past the kitchen window without looking in, and Evelyn watched him go, and then she turned back to her coffee. Hetty set a plate of eggs on the table without comment. Thomas came in from the yard 5 minutes later, with mud on his boots and wide eyes. Doyle's loading his horse, he said. I know. What happened? Ranch business, she said. Eat something before you go back out. He sat down. He looked at her. He looked at the eggs. He picked up his fork. You found something else, he said. Eat. Evie. Thomas, eat your eggs. He ate his eggs. By the end of the 3rd week, the ranch had lost 2 long-term employees and gained a functioning account system, a corrected insurance filing, and a livestock count that was accurate for the first time in nearly a decade. Cord told her with the brief economy of a man unused to giving compliments that the new supply form had already saved a wasted run to Billings because Bo had caught a redundant order before it went out. "That's what it's for?" Evelyn said. "Yeah," Cord said, "but nobody put it there before." She filed that away and said nothing. What she was beginning to notice, what she was trying very hard not to read too much into, was the way the ranch itself was changing around her. Not dramatically, not the way things change in stories with visible turning points and clear before and after. It was smaller than that, quieter. The hands said good morning to her now. Not all of them. Two of the older men still looked past her with the particular stubbornness of people who have decided not to adjust, but most of them. Bo had started initialing his supply forms without being reminded. Hetty had begun including her in the weekly meal planning instead of simply producing food and expecting silent approval. And Rhett. Rhett was harder to read than any of them. He did not become warm. He did not become easy. He remained the same contained, exacting, silent, comfortable man she had met on that porch, but there was something different in the containment now. Less like a wall built to keep people out. More like a room with the windows slightly open. He had started appearing in the kitchen before dinner. Not every evening, maybe 3 nights out of 7. He would come in, sit down at the table, his table now in some quiet way. The chair across from hers, and read through whatever documents she had prepared, or review the week's accounts, or sometimes simply sit there with a coffee while she worked, not speaking, not requiring anything, just present. She found she did not mind it. She found, if she was precise with herself, that she noticed on the evenings he didn't come. The letter arrived on the Tuesday. She almost missed the significance of it. It came in an ordinary envelope with a Billings postmark and was addressed to Rhett, and she put it with the rest of the mail on his desk without opening it because she was not in the habit of reading his correspondence. But Rhett read it at dinner, and something happened to his face that she had not seen before. Not anger, not the controlled burn she had come to recognize as his version of upset. This was something older, something that moved slower and sat deeper. He folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket and said nothing, and she said nothing, and they finished dinner in silence, but a different silence than their usual, a heavier one. Later that night, Thomas found her in the kitchen. "Cord told me something today," he said. She looked up. "He said Callahan had a wife before, years ago, before he owned this ranch." Thomas sat down carefully. "He said she died in a fire, here on this property, when it belonged to the previous owner and Callahan was just a foreman." He paused. "He said there was a baby." The kitchen was very quiet. "A baby," Evelyn said. "A little girl. She didn't—" Thomas stopped. "She didn't survive either." Evelyn put her pen down. She sat with that for a moment, with the weight of it, with the particular specific weight of a loss that cannot be reasoned through or recovered from in any straightforward way. A wife, a child, a fire. And then years of this, the silence, the distance, the house stripped of everything soft, the life reduced to work and management, and the kind of control that is really just grief held at a permanent arm's length. "The carved horse," she said almost to herself. "What?" "Nothing." She picked up her pen. "Thank you for telling me." Thomas looked at her. "Evie, are you—" "I'm fine," she said. "Go to bed." He went. She sat at the table for a long time after not writing anything, just thinking about a man who had built an entire life around the principle that caring for things was how you lost them. She thought about the letter in his jacket pocket. She thought about whatever was written in it, what had reached him from Billings, that could make a man like Rhett Callahan look for just a moment like someone who did not know where to put his hands. She did not go to him. She did not have the right to, not yet, and possibly not ever. But she lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the quiet of the house and the far-off wind through the mountains, and she thought about the kind of courage it takes to keep building things when you know exactly how fast they can burn. She found the wooden horse 3 days later. She was not snooping. She had been asked by Rhett to retrieve a survey document from the lower drawer of his desk while he was out riding the east fence line. and when she opened the drawer and moved the papers aside, it was simply there. A small carved horse, rough finished, the kind a man might have made with his own hands over long winter evenings, or the kind a man might have bought for a child who never grew old enough to play with it. She looked at it for a long moment. She did not touch it. She took the survey document and closed the drawer carefully and went back to the kitchen, and she did not tell anyone what she had seen, and she did not bring it up to Rhett, and she carried the knowledge of it quietly, the way you carry something that is not yours, but that you feel the weight of anyway. That evening, Rhett came to the kitchen. He sat across from her. He did not have any documents with him. He had his coffee and his silence and that slightly open quality she had noticed in him recently, the windows cracked feeling, the sense of a room ventilating slowly. She worked on the next month's supply projections and said nothing. After 15 minutes, he said, "The letter was from a lawyer in Billings." She looked up. "Someone is making a claim against my land title," he said. "They're saying the original purchase when I bought this property 8 years ago had a procedural defect, that the previous owner didn't have clean title to transfer." She set her pen down fully. "What kind of procedural defect?" "Allegedly, there was a lien against the property that wasn't disclosed at sale. A railroad claim preemption rights filed in 1871 that were never formally resolved. A railroad preemption claim." She thought about this. "That's not straightforward. That would require documentation going back 30 years. The lawyer's letter says they have it." "Who filed the claim?" Rhett looked at her. His jaw was set. His eyes were very calm in the way that meant he was working hard to keep them that way. "A man named Victor Hale," he said. "He represents a railroad acquisition group out of Chicago." Evelyn felt something move through her, not quite a cold feeling, but close. The kind of feeling that comes when a name you hoped you would not hear again walks into a room anyway. She kept her expression even. "Do you know him?" Rhett asked. She took a breath. "I've heard the name," she said carefully. "He was operating in Missouri 2 years ago. He was known for finding old title irregularities and using them as leverage, not always to acquire the land, but to force settlements, to make property owners pay to have the claim dropped. A shakedown. A legal one, just barely." She paused. "He's effective, Rhett. He knows how to build a case that looks legitimate even when it isn't. He uses real documents, real historical records, and constructs arguments around gaps that most people don't know how to refute." Rhett was watching her face very carefully. "You know a lot about him." She met his eyes. "I told you I've heard the name." A silence stretched between them, not hostile, but probing. He was a man who paid attention to what was not said, and she could feel him paying attention now. "We'll need a land attorney," she said, moving them forward deliberately. "Someone who knows historical title law in Montana. And we'll need to pull the original purchase documents, everything from the 1871 period forward. If there was a railroad lien, it will have a filing record somewhere. That's months of work. Then we should start now." She looked at him steadily. "This is your land, Rhett. 12 years of your life is built on it. We're not going to let a man in a good suit take it because he found a piece of paper from 30 years ago." He looked at her for a long moment. "We," he said. She realized what she had said. "I meant, no." His voice was quiet. "Don't correct it." The kitchen was very still. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the dark distance a horse called out once and was quiet, and Rhett Callahan sat across from her at his kitchen table with his coffee in his hands and said nothing more. He didn't need to. And Evelyn Pierce, who had come to Black Hollow with a contract and a practical plan and absolutely no intention of feeling anything, sat very still and understood that something had already changed that she could not change back. She did not know yet whether that frightened her or steadied her. She was beginning to suspect it was both. The land attorney's name was Franklin Marsh, and he arrived from Helena on a Thursday morning with a leather case full of documents and the careful, measured energy of a man who had spent 30 years learning exactly how much trouble old paperwork could cause. Rhett met him in the front room. Evelyn sat at the desk in the corner, not introduced, not explained, simply present with her notebook open and her pen ready. Marsh glanced at her once, and then looked at Rhett, and Rhett said, "She stays. Anything you say to me, you say in front of her." Marsh adjusted his glasses and sat down. He had reviewed the letter from Victor Hale's legal team before coming, and his assessment was not immediately reassuring. The railroad preemption claim from 1871 was real, meaning it existed as a filed document in the territorial records, which was the part that mattered for leverage. Whether it was legally enforceable was a different question entirely, one that depended on a chain of documentation that Marsh said would take weeks to reconstruct. The original preemption filing, Marsh said, setting a page on the table, was made by the Northern Corridor Railroad Company in the summer of 1871. They claimed right of first refusal on a 2-mile buffer on either side of a proposed rail line through this territory. The rail line was never built, Rhett said. Correct. The company folded in 1874, but the claim was never formally withdrawn. It was simply abandoned, left in the territorial record like a door that was pushed almost shut, and nobody bothered to close all the way. So Hale found the door, Evelyn said. Marsh looked at her properly for the first time. Exactly. His argument will be that the claim transfers to the successor railroad interest, which his client group is now asserting. It's a construction that has been tried in other territories successfully in 2 cases I know of. And unsuccessfully? Evelyn asked. In 4 others, when the original lien can be shown to have been extinguished either by abandonment statute or by subsequent clear title transactions. He paused. Montana's territorial abandonment statutes from that period are not well organized. Meaning they exist, but they're hard to find, Evelyn said. Meaning I will need to find them, Marsh said. And that takes time. Hale's people know it takes time. That is part of the strategy file. The claim make the landowner spend money defending it, create enough uncertainty that settlement looks attractive. Rhett leaned forward. What does settlement look like? In cases like this, the claimant offers to withdraw for a payment, usually a fraction of the land's assessed value framed as a resolution fee. Enough to be painful. Not enough that fighting seems obviously worth it. I'm not settling, Rhett said. I didn't expect you were, Marsh said. Which means we fight it on the record. And to do that, we need the original 1878 purchase documents, all title transfer records between 1874 and 1878, and anything from the Territorial Filing Office that shows the Northern Corridor claim was considered resolved. He closed his case. I'll begin in Helena. It would help if you could locate anything in your own records from the original purchase. Evelyn, Rhett said. She was already writing the list. After Marsh left, they sat at the kitchen table with the original deed box that Rhett pulled from the safe in his office, a battered iron box that had lived at the back of a shelf for 8 years, unopened the way important documents do when the person who holds them trusts that nothing will require them. He set it on the table in front of her without ceremony. I don't know what's in there, he said. The lawyer who handled the purchase died 2 years after the sale. His office closed. Evelyn opened the box. She went through it slowly and methodically, the way she did everything, sorting documents into categories as she pulled them out. The original deed, the survey map, the bill of sale, correspondence between the previous owner and the purchasing attorney, a title insurance certificate from a company in St. Louis. She stopped at the title insurance certificate. She read it twice. Rhett, she said. He looked up from the deed he'd been reading. The title insurance company is listed here as Guardian Mutual of St. Louis. She set the certificate on the table so he could see it. If this policy was still active at the time of purchase, and if the railroad preemption claim constitutes a title defect, then the insurance company may be liable to defend this, not you. He stared at the document. That was 8 years ago. Policies like this were written for exactly this kind of situation. Whether the company still exists and whether the policy is still enforceable are different questions, but this is something Marsh needs to see immediately. She was already writing. This could change the entire posture of the defense. How do you know about title insurance policies? She looked up. My father bought a property in 1889 with a similar certificate. When a neighbor filed an easement dispute 3 years later, the insurance company paid to defend the title." She paused. "We won. It was the last good year before everything else went wrong." He was watching her face when she said that quietly, with the kind of attention that did not demand anything from her. She looked back at the document. "I'll write to Marsh today." Thomas, meanwhile, had become something the ranch hands called a natural. It happened without announcement or ceremony, the way real aptitude tends to surface, not in moments of performance, but in ordinary situations, where a person simply does the right thing before they've had time to think about whether they know how. He was on the mare that had been running shy, the one Cord had mentioned in the first week, and whatever he did in the hour he spent with her that morning, Cord saw it and reported it to Rhett, and Rhett told Evelyn over dinner that evening. "Cord wants to move him to the horse management rotation," Rhett said. "That's a significant shift from fence repair," Evelyn said. "Cord doesn't make suggestions he doesn't mean." She thought about Thomas's face on the stagecoach, tight and pale, and trying not to show it, and then thought about the version of him she'd seen this morning, mud on his jacket, and standing easy beside the largest horse on the property, with his hand on its neck, like he'd been doing it his whole life. "Does Thomas know?" she asked. "I told Cord to tell him this afternoon. He'll be pleased. He worked for it." She looked at Rhett across the table. "Yes," she said. "He did." They ate in a comfortable silence for a moment, and then Rhett said without looking up, "You never told me what your father's property was, the one with the title dispute." She considered how much to say. "A small farm in Missouri, outside of St. Louis." She turned her fork slowly. "He bought it when I was 12. It was the thing he was proudest of in his life, owning land. Having something real." A pause. "He died before the dispute was fully resolved, but the outcome was good, which he never knew." Rhett was quiet for a moment. "How old were you when he died?" 19. Thomas was 7. He said nothing further. But she noticed he had set down his fork, and he was simply sitting there, not eating, not reading, just present with what she had said. "It was a long time ago," she said, because she felt the need to move them forward. "Time doesn't always make it smaller," he said. She looked at him. His eyes were on the table. His jaw was set in that particular way that meant he was saying something that cost him something. "No," she said quietly. "It doesn't." The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, one of the horses moved in the paddock. "The letter from Billings," Evelyn said carefully. "The one that came last week. Was there anything in it beyond the legal claim?" Rhett looked up. Something shifted in his expression, a door moving just slightly. "It mentioned this property by the previous owner's name," he said. "The man I bought it from. His name was Aldous Crane." He paused. "Crane was the one who was here when there was a fire, before I owned the land." She kept her face still and her voice even. "I know about the fire, Rhett." He looked at her. Not surprised, exactly, more like a man who had known something was coming and was now simply receiving it. "Thomas told you," he said. "Cord told Thomas. I want you to know I didn't seek the information." "I know you didn't." He was quiet for a long moment. "It was 12 years ago. I was a foreman here, Crane's Ranch, back then. We lived in the southeast building. My wife Sarah, she liked that building because it got the morning light." He stopped. Evelyn waited. She did not rush him. She did not offer comfort, not yet, not the kind that papers over the truth of things. She simply stayed where she was and let him take whatever time he needed. "The fire started at 2 in the morning, he said. "I got out. I got her out, or I thought I had. She went back in." His voice did not change register. He was not performing this. He was just saying it the way you say something you have said to yourself 10,000 times until the words are worn smooth. "For the baby. Our daughter was in the east room and Sarah went back and I tried to follow in the roof." He stopped again. "You don't have to tell me the rest," Evelyn said. "I know I don't." He looked at the table. I've never told anyone the rest." She did not say anything. "Her name was Clara," he said. "The baby. She was 8 months old." The kitchen was completely still. Evelyn put her hand on the table, not reaching for him, not touching him, just placing it there between them, like an open door that he could walk through or not. He looked at her hand. He did not move toward it, but he did not look away from it either. "After the fire," he said, "I bought this land from Crane. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because walking away felt like leaving them twice. Maybe because I wanted to build something on the same ground to put something good on top of the worst night of my life." He breathed out slowly. "I've been building ever since." "And not much else," she said gently without judgment. He met her eyes. "No, not much else." She pulled her hand back slowly. She picked up her coffee cup. She gave him the ordinary shelter of a normal moment to recover himself in. "The title insurance certificate may protect everything you've built," she said. "I want you to know I'm going to do everything I can to make sure it does." He nodded. Once. The smallest possible movement of his head, but it meant something. She knew by now that when Rhett Callahan nodded at you, it meant something. Victor Hale arrived in Black Hollow on a Friday afternoon, and Evelyn knew he was in town before Rhett did. She knew because she was at the general store when his carriage came down the main street, a well-appointed carriage, the kind that is slightly too fine for the road it's on, driven by a hired man in a hat that had never seen a working ranch. And she knew because when the carriage door opened and Victor Hale stepped out onto the main street of Black Hollow, Montana, he was exactly what she remembered: tall, well-dressed. The kind of handsome that has been carefully maintained over years. He had a way of moving through space that said he expected it to accommodate him, and in her experience it usually did, because he worked rooms the way certain men do, with warmth and humor, and a performance of openness that was really just a very effective way of making people trust him before they had time to decide whether they should. She had trusted him once. 2 years ago in Missouri, before she had understood the difference between a man who appears honest and a man who actually is. She stood very still behind the dry goods display and watched him exchange pleasantries with the man from the land office across the street, and she felt something cold and alert move through her chest. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling of recognizing weather before it arrives. She paid for her supplies and drove back to the ranch and found Rhett in the barn. "He's here," she said. Rhett looked up from the bridle he was repairing. He read her face. "Hale. He arrived an hour ago. He's already speaking with the land office." She kept her voice level. "He works quickly. He'll want to establish a public presence before making any formal approach. It's how he builds leverage. He makes himself known in the community first, so that when he makes his claim he already has relationships, and the other party looks like they're resisting something reasonable." Rhett set down the bridle. He looked at her with that careful, measuring attention. "You know how he works," he said. It was not quite an accusation, but it was a question she could no longer avoid. She met his eyes directly. "I told you I'd heard his name. That was true, but I knew more than that, and I should have told you when you first mentioned him." She kept her hands still at her sides. 2 years ago in Missouri, my father's estate, what was left of it, was tied up in a property claim. Victor Hale represented the claimant. He approached me privately outside the legal proceedings and offered to make the claim disappear in exchange for a private settlement that would have cleared most of what was left of my father's estate. "Did you pay it?" "I couldn't. I didn't have it." She breathed in. "He found other ways to make things difficult. He spoke to people who knew our family. He suggested things about my father's business dealings that were misleading, but not provably false. By the time the claim was formally resolved in our favor, the damage to our reputation in the community was significant enough that it didn't matter much that we won." She paused. "Thomas and I left Missouri 6 months later, which was part of why your offer was the only real option on the table." Rhett said nothing for a long moment. He looked at the bridle in his hands, then at the barn floor, then at her. "Why didn't you tell me this when I showed you the letter?" he said. "Because I wasn't sure it would happen like this. I hoped the legal mechanism might be the whole strategy." that it wouldn't become personal. She held his gaze. I was wrong to hope that. I should have told you. Yes, he said. You should have. The word landed cleanly, not cruelly, just honestly, the way he did everything. I know, she said. I'm sorry. He stood there for a moment. She could see him working through something, not anger, but recalibration. The same thing she had watched him do in the first days when she had challenged his contract. The mind of a man who processes new information seriously rather than reactively. Does he know you're here? Rhett said finally. I don't know. He may not have made the connection yet between the name Callahan and me. She paused. But he will. He's thorough. When he does, she thought about this honestly. He'll use it. Whatever way seems most useful to him, whether that's approaching me privately again, or making it a public question about why I married you, and what I might have told you about his methods. She met his eyes. I want you to know that anything he says about me, any story he tells in this town, I will give you the truth of it, all of it, however it makes me look. Rhett looked at her for a long time. I know you will, he said. Not like a man granting permission, like a man who had already decided something and was simply confirming it out loud. Something loosened slightly in her chest. We need to tell Marsh, she said, about my history with Hale. He needs to know there's a personal element. Tonight, Rhett said. I'll write to him tonight. He picked up the bridle again and went back to work, and Evelyn went back to the house, and she sat at the kitchen table and thought about Victor Hale walking down the main street of Black Hollow with that particular smile of his, the one that had fooled her once, and she thought, not again. Not here. Not this. Thomas found out about Hale that evening. He came into the kitchen after supper, looking like a man carrying something heavy, and she knew before he opened his mouth that Cord had said something in passing. Cord had a habit of keeping the younger hands informed about ranch business without realizing he was doing it. The man who's claiming Callahan's land, Thomas said. Is it the same? Yes, Evelyn said. Thomas sat down hard. Evie. It's all right. It is not all right. After everything he did in Missouri, the things he said about Papa... Thomas? Her voice was firm. Anger won't help us here. What we need is documentation, legal preparation, and patience. We are not in Missouri, and Red is not the kind of man who loses what he has built. Thomas looked at her carefully. Something in her voice had told him more than she intended. You care about him, Thomas said. I work for him. That's not what I said. She did not answer that. She opened her notebook and went back to the document she'd been preparing for Marsh. Thomas sat there for a moment longer. When he finally stood to leave, he put his hand briefly on her shoulder, the way he had done when he was small, and she had been the one who was frightened. Don't try to handle this alone, he said. I'm not alone, she said, and she realized as she said it that she meant it. Hale came to the ranch 3 days later. He arrived in the late afternoon without announcement, which was a choice, the kind of choice that says, I'm not asking for an appointment because I don't believe I need one. He knocked on the front door, and Hetty answered it, and Hetty came to find Evelyn in the study, with an expression on her face that said she had already formed an opinion about the visitor, and it was not a favorable one. Man at the door, Hetty said. Too polished. Evelyn set down her pen. She stood. She smoothed her skirt once. She went to the front door. Victor Hale looked at her, and for exactly 1 second, the space of a heartbeat, his composure slipped. Not dramatically. Just a small adjustment, a rapid reassembly, the kind that happens when a man encounters something he expected, and also didn't. Then the smile came back. Warm. Open. The one she remembered. Evelyn, he said. I had heard. I almost didn't believe it. Mr. Hale, she said. You look well. He said it the way he said everything, like a gift he was giving her, rather than an observation he was making. What can I do for you? She said. I was hoping to speak with Mr. Callahan. Mr. Callahan is occupied. You can contact his attorney Franklin Marsh of Helena for any legal correspondence. I believe you have that information." Hale tilted his head slightly. "I was hoping for something less formal. A conversation between neighbors." "You're not a neighbor," she said. "You're a claimant. That distinction matters here." He looked at her for a moment. The warmth in his eyes recalibrated slightly, not disappearing, but adjusting the way a man adjusts when he realizes the tool he brought isn't the right one for the job. "You've briefed him on our history in Missouri," he said. "I've told him everything he needs to know." "Everything." The word was soft, weighted. "Everything," she said, "including the things you implied about my father that were not true." He smiled again, slower this time. "I have documents, Evelyn, related to your father's business. Things that weren't part of the Missouri proceeding. If this goes to a public hearing, then we will see those documents in a public hearing," she said, "and my attorney will see them. And we will respond to them with whatever the truth is, because the truth is the only thing I have ever relied on." She held the door without moving. "I think you came here expecting to find the same woman you met in Missouri," she said. "Scared, short on options, someone who could be pressured." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not in Missouri anymore." Hale stood there for a moment. He looked past her into the house, a brief assessment, the habit of a man who is always measuring his environment, and then he looked back at her. "Mr. Callahan is a lucky man," he said. "Goodbye, Mr. Hale." She closed the door. She stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds, both hands flat against the door, breathing once slowly. Then she turned around. Rhett was standing at the end of the hallway. He had come in from the back. He had heard all of it. His expression was unreadable in the way she had stopped mistaking for emptiness, because she knew now that when Rhett Callahan's face went very still, it meant something large and important was happening underneath. "You didn't tell me he was coming," he said. "I didn't know. He came without warning." He looked at the door, then at her. "The documents he mentioned," he said. "About your father." "I don't know what he has. Whatever it is, he's been holding it in reserve." She met his eyes. "I meant what I said to him. I will tell you the truth of anything he brings forward, all of it." Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." He said it the same way he had said it before, not as permission, not as reassurance. As a fact, he had already settled in himself. He walked past her toward his office. At the doorway he stopped. "You did well," he said, without turning around. She stood in the hallway and did not say anything. She pressed her hands together once very briefly, and then she went back to the study and sat down and picked up her pen, and she wrote to Marsh about Hale's visit in the steady, clear handwriting that her father had taught her, the one that did not shake. She did not think about the way Rhett's voice had sounded when he said those 3 words. She wrote the letter, but she did think about it. She thought about it for a long time. That night she went to get a glass of water at midnight and found Rhett in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with the carved wooden horse in his hands. He did not hear her come in. He was looking at the small figure, with his head slightly bowed, a private moment, completely unguarded, the kind she had not seen from him before. His shoulders were not straight. His hands, which were always precise and controlled, were simply holding the horse the way a person holds something they have held many times in the dark. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. For a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. She could see the thing in his face that he usually kept locked away. Not grief exactly, not anymore, but the shape grief leaves behind when it has lived in a person long enough to become part of the structure. The way a healed bone is still different from an unbroken one. You can't always see it, but it's there in the way the person moves through the world. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding." He set the horse on the table. "It was Clara's. I made it for her before she was born." He looked at it for a moment. "I take it out sometimes, when things are heavy." She stood in the doorway. She did not go closer. She did not retreat. "Things are heavy right now," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. They are. A silence settled between them, but it was the kind of silence that had been between them before, the kind that did not require filling. She had learned to trust it. The silence between her and Rhett Callahan was the most honest conversation she had ever had with anyone. She crossed to the water pitcher on the counter. She poured herself a glass. She poured one for him without asking and set it on the table, and then sat down across from him, and they sat in the lamplight with the carved horse between them and the weight of Victor Hale, and 12 years of loss and a land claim from 30 years ago, and two people who had not planned on any of this, and somehow the weight of it together was less than it would have been apart. She did not say that. He did not say it either. But she could feel him feeling it the same way she was, and that was the moment she stopped pretending she didn't know what was happening between them. She wasn't falling in love with a man. She was recognizing one, the kind that is made from loss and work and honesty and the specific courage of a person who keeps building things even after they have seen how fast they burn. And she was afraid of that. She was genuinely afraid because she knew, in the way she knew numbers and patterns and the truth that hides in ledger columns, that there was no system she could build to protect herself from this. There was only the choice: stay or don't. She looked at the carved horse. She thought about Clara, 8 months old, in an east room with morning light. She thought about a woman who went back in. She thought about the kind of love that walks back into a burning building, and whether that was the bravest thing or the most devastating thing a person could do. Maybe she thought it was both. She picked up her water glass. She took a drink. She set it down. She stayed at the table. The morning after Hale's visit, Black Hollow had already heard about it. That was the thing about small towns that Evelyn had forgotten during her years in St. Louis. Information moved faster than horses. By the time she walked into the general store at 8 o'clock for the weekly household supplies, Mrs. Albright was already watching her from behind the fabric counter with an expression that was 1 part sympathy and 2 parts careful assessment. "There was a man asking about your husband yesterday," Mrs. Albright said. Not unkindly, but directly. "I know," Evelyn said. "He came to the ranch afterward. He had supper at the hotel dining room, spoke to half the town before the meal was finished." She paused, folding a length of calico with unnecessary precision. "He's charming. The kind of charming that makes you feel clever for noticing it." "Yes," Evelyn said. "That's exactly what he is." Mrs. Albright set down the fabric. "He said the Callahan land purchase had irregularities. He said it the way you say something you're reluctant to say. You know, the voice that makes people think you're doing them a favor by telling them." She looked at Evelyn steadily. "He also asked about you. Where you'd come from. Why you'd married so quickly." Something cold moved through Evelyn's chest. "What did people say?" "Not much. People here respect Rhett Callahan, whatever they think of his manner." A pause. "But they're curious about you. And curious people listen harder to a charming stranger than they should." Evelyn bought her supplies and drove back to the ranch and went directly to Rhett's office without taking off her coat. "He's working the town," she said. "He had dinner at the hotel last night and spoke to anyone who would listen about the land claim." Rhett looked up from the documents on his desk. He had been working since before dawn, she could tell by the number of pages spread across the surface and the second empty coffee cup near his elbow. "What did he say?" "Enough. He's planting questions. Not accusations, questions. About the purchase, about our marriage, about me." She sat down. "This is how he operates. He doesn't attack directly. He creates doubt and then lets the community do the rest of the work for him." "Let him talk," Rhett said. "Rhett. Let him talk." His voice was even. "This town has known me for 12 years. I've paid my debts, kept my word, and employed half the men who have families here. Whatever Hale says in a hotel dining room, it doesn't change what people actually know." "That's true," she said carefully. "But reputation isn't only about what people know, it's about what they're willing to believe when they're uncertain. And Hale is very good at creating uncertainty." Rhett looked at her. "You're worried." "I'm realistic." He held her gaze for a moment, and then he said, "What would you do?" She had already thought about it. We need to file a formal response to the land claim before Marsh has fully completed his research. Not the final defense, just an initial filing that establishes we are contesting the claim with representation and that we are cooperating with the county land office. It puts our name on the public record as the responding party in good standing. She paused. And I think we should host a dinner. Rhett blinked. In 4 weeks, she had never seen Rhett Callahan blink at anything she said. A dinner, he repeated. Not a formal one, a working one. Invite the county commissioner, the land office clerk, the sheriff, the reverend. People whose opinion shapes how the rest of the town thinks. She kept her tone matter-of-fact. It's not manipulation. It's simply making sure that the people who matter most to this community's judgment of you see you at your own table in your own house, conducting yourself as you always have. A long silence. You're asking me to host a dinner party, he said. In this house. With my help, she said. Obviously. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Obviously. Will you do it? He picked up his pen. When? End of the week, before Hale has time to deepen his relationships in town. Fine. He went back to his documents. You handle the arrangements. I already started, she said. He looked up. She was already walking out of the room. The dinner preparations gave Hetty something Evelyn quickly understood she had not had in years, a genuine project. The cook moved through the kitchen for 3 days with a focused energy that was almost frightening in its efficiency, and she had opinions about every element of the menu that she expressed with the authority of someone who has been waiting a long time to be asked. Roast elk, Hetty said on the first day. The commissioner has been eating Mrs. Park's venison stew for a month. He'll remember elk. Fine, Evelyn said. And the good tablecloth. It's in the cedar chest. Nobody's touched it. I'll get it out. And candles, not lamps. Candles. Hetty pointed her spoon for emphasis. Lamps are for working. Candles are for meaning it. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway that afternoon, looking slightly bewildered by the level of organized activity. Is there anything I can do? He asked. Can you chop? Hetty demanded. Yes, ma'am. Then chop. Thomas chopped. In the evenings after supper, Evelyn and Rhett sat in his office and worked through the stack of documents Marsh had sent from Helena, a preliminary collection of territorial records, land office filings, and correspondence related to the Northern Corridor Railroad Company's 1871 preemption claim. It was slow, detailed work, the kind of work that requires 2 people who can sustain concentration and who trust each other enough to think out loud without embarrassment. They had, she realized, midway through the 3rd evening, become that. Somewhere between the first ledger she had brought to him in the barn and the midnight kitchen and the carved horse on the table, they had become people who could think out loud together. She was not sure exactly when it had happened. She was not sure it mattered. On the 3rd evening, she found something. It was buried in a folded letter between a territorial land commissioner and a Northern Corridor Railroad representative dated November 1873, 8 months before the railroad company officially collapsed. She read it twice. Then she set it on the desk in front of Rhett. Read the second paragraph, she said. He read it. His eyes moved slowly across the page and then stopped. They withdrew it, he said, informally. The representative writes that the company is, quote, relinquishing all preemption interests in the Black Hollow Corridor in anticipation of the company's dissolution. He requests that the commissioner acknowledge the withdrawal in writing. And did the commissioner acknowledge it? I don't know yet. This is only the railroad's letter. But if there is a response in the commissioner's records, even an informal one, it establishes that the claim was voluntarily abandoned before the company dissolved, which means it could not legally transfer to any successor interest. She looked at him. It would end Hale's case. Rhett set the letter down carefully. He looked at it the way you look at something you are not yet willing to fully trust. Something that seems too good to be exactly what it appears to be. Marsh needs this tonight, he said. I've already written the letter. I just need to know if you want to send a rider to Helena tomorrow morning or wait for the post. Rider! he said immediately. She handed him the sealed envelope. She had written it an hour ago. He looked at it. He looked at her. You had already written it, he said. I thought you'd say, Ryder. He shook his head, not in frustration, in something closer to disbelief. The slow, private disbelief of a man who keeps being surprised by the same person and has not yet decided what to do with the feeling. Evelyn, he said. Don't, she said gently. Just send the rider. He sent the rider. The dinner was on Saturday evening, and it was by any objective measure exactly what it needed to be. The county commissioner, a broad, deliberate man named Hargrove, ate 2 servings of the elk and told Rhett the ranch looked well managed. The land office clerk, a younger man named Petrie, spoke at length with Evelyn about the title insurance certificate and left with a noticeably different understanding of the legal situation than he had arrived with. The sheriff said little, but watched everything, which was precisely what sheriffs do, and Evelyn made sure he left with the impression of a household that operated with complete transparency and nothing to conceal. The Reverend complimented Hetty's apple cake. Hetty accepted the compliment without smiling, but stood slightly straighter for the rest of the evening. Thomas sat between Cord and Petrie and held his own in the conversation with a natural ease that made Evelyn watch him with quiet pride. The boy who had been white-knuckled on a stagecoach 6 weeks ago was now passing the breadbasket and making the land office clerk laugh with a story about the shy mare, and doing it with the effortless warmth of someone who had simply been given enough stability to be himself. She caught Rhett watching Thomas at one point, a brief, unguarded look, something almost fatherly in it, and then Rhett caught her watching him and looked back at his plate. After the guests had gone, and Hetty had retreated to her quarters, and Thomas had walked back to the bunkhouse, Evelyn and Rhett stood in the kitchen doing what they had somehow fallen into the habit of doing. The quiet end-of-evening reset, her washing the last cups, him putting the chairs back, both of them moving around each other in the easy, worn-in way of people who have been sharing a space long enough that they have learned its rhythms. Hargrove will talk, Rhett said, when the formal hearing comes. Yes, in our favor. She handed him a cup to dry. Petrie understood the insurance angle. He'll look at it properly now instead of taking Hale's framing at face value. The sheriff, he'll wait for evidence, but he's fair. She paused. He noticed your handshake. Rhett looked at her. My handshake. You shook his hand first, before he offered. It's a small thing. It matters to men like him. Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then, how do you know all of this? Know what? People. How they work. What they notice. He set the cup down. You walked into this house 6 weeks ago, and in 6 weeks, you have restructured my accounts, removed 2 dishonest employees, identified a legal defense that my own lawyer missed, and hosted a dinner that shifted the way this town thinks about a land claim that was filed against me. He looked at her steadily. How do you know how to do all of that? She thought about how to answer honestly. I've been reading rooms since I was 12 years old, she said. When my father started making mistakes with money, someone had to know who to trust and who to watch. I learned to pay attention. She looked at her hands. It's not a talent, it's just practice. Years of practice. In situations where the cost of being wrong was something I couldn't afford. He was very still. I'm sorry, he said. That you had to learn it that way. She looked up. The directness of it, the simple, unqualified acknowledgement hit her somewhere she had not expected. Thank you, she said, quietly. They stood there for a moment in the kitchen, close enough that she could see the particular quality of his attention, the way he looked at her fully, without the guarded withdrawal she had grown used to in the early weeks. Then Rhett said in a voice that was doing its best to be ordinary, You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be... The front door opened. They both turned. Thomas stood in the doorway, and his face was wrong. Not frightened, but close. The expression of a man delivering information he does not want to deliver. There's something you both need to hear, he said. Now. Cord was waiting in the front room. He had ridden from town, which meant he had been there for a reason. And whatever he had heard had brought him back to the ranch at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, rather than waiting until morning. That alone told Evelyn everything she needed to know about the severity. "Hale spoke at the hotel bar tonight," Cord said, "after the dinner, while your guests were still riding home." He looked at Rhett, then at Evelyn. He wasn't careful. He'd had a drink. He told the men at the bar that the woman Callahan married wasn't what she appeared, that she'd been involved in a property dispute in Missouri that ended with creditors losing money, that she had a history of attaching herself to men with property, and that Callahan didn't know what he'd brought into his house. The room was very quiet. Thomas's jaw was set. "It's a lie," he said. "I know it's a lie," Cord said. "But 4 men heard it." Rhett said nothing. He was standing very still, looking at the fireplace with his hands at his sides, and that expression she knew now, the one that meant something large and controlled, was happening underneath. "Rhett," Evelyn said. He didn't turn immediately. When he did, his face was composed. But his eyes were doing something she hadn't seen before, something that looked, if she had to name it, like the beginning of pain. "Is any part of it true?" he said. It was not an accusation. She could hear him working very hard to make sure it was not. But it was a direct question, and he needed a direct answer. "The property dispute is true," she said. "I told you about it. The creditors losing money that refers to the outcome of the Missouri proceeding. When my father's estate was cleared of the fraudulent claim, the claimant's financial backers lost the investment they had made in Hale's case. I had nothing to do with that. Beyond winning a legal proceeding, I was entitled to win." She held his gaze. "The rest, the implication about my character and my intentions, is false. You know why I came here. You have the letter I wrote before we met. You have 6 weeks of my conduct in your house. You can weigh all of that against what a man said over whiskey in a hotel bar." A silence. Thomas made a small movement, starting to say something, and Evelyn stopped him with a look. This was between her and Rhett. It had to be. Rhett turned back to the fireplace. He stood there for a long moment, with his back to the room. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "I'm not asking the question because I believe him. I'm asking because I want you to know I asked, and you answered, and that's the end of it." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "All right," she said. He turned around. He looked at Cord. "Is there anything else?" "He mentioned the land claim," Cord said. "Said it was airtight. Said the Callahan ranch would be in receivership by spring." He paused. "Some of the men at the bar believed him. Some always will," Rhett said. "That's why he said it in a bar and not a courtroom." He looked at Evelyn. "Write to Marsh tomorrow. I want to know where we stand on the commissioner's response letter." "I'll write tonight," she said. He nodded. He looked at Thomas. "Thank you for coming to get me." Thomas nodded, some of the tension going out of his shoulders. Cord left. Thomas went back to the bunkhouse. Evelyn was halfway to the study when Rhett said from behind her, "Evelyn." She stopped. "What Hale said tonight," he said, "about your character." A pause. "Any man in this town who knows this ranch and watches you work will know it's false within a week." She stood with her back to him. Something moved through her chest, sharp and warm, and harder to manage than she expected. "Thank you," she said. "It's the truth," he said. "I don't give comfort, just the truth." "I know," she said. "That's why it helps." She went to the study and wrote the letter to Marsh, and did not let herself sit with what she was feeling until the letter was sealed, and the lamp was low, and the house was completely quiet. Then she sat with it. The letter from Marsh arrived 4 days later, and it arrived with a second document enclosed, a photographic copy of a commissioner's response letter dated February 1874, found in the Helena Territorial Archive, acknowledging the Northern Corridor Railroad Company's formal withdrawal of all preemption interests in the Black Hollow Corridor. Evelyn read it standing at the front door, still holding the mail packet. Then she walked to the barn where Rhett was working with Thomas on the mare's training. The two of them standing together on either side of the horse, and the sight of it, the easy collaborative posture of them, stopped her for one moment before she spoke. "We have it," she said. Both men looked at her. She held up the letter. Rhett crossed the distance between them in 4 strides. He took the letter. He read it. She watched his face, watched the controlled, careful, slow opening of something that had been tightly held for a very long time. Not joy exactly. Not relief. Something more complicated than either. The feeling of a man who has been braced for impact for months, finally being told the impact may not come. "This ends it?" Thomas asked. "If the court accepts the archive copy as authentic, and Marsh says there's no reason they won't, then Hale's entire claim collapses. There is no transferable preemption right, because the right was voluntarily extinguished before the company dissolved." She looked at Rhett. "He has nothing." Rhett looked at the letter for a long moment. "How did Marsh find it?" he said. "He said, and I think he meant this as a compliment to us, that the specific date range he searched was narrowed by the letter we found in your deed box and sent to him by writer. Without that, he would have searched a much broader window and might have missed it entirely." Rhett looked at her. Something was happening in his face, something that was moving through the controlled surface toward something more honest. "The writer," he said. "Yes." "Which you had the letter ready for?" "Yes." "Which means—" "It means we found it together," she said firmly. "That's all it means." Thomas very tactfully went back to the horse. Rhett folded the letter. He held it in both hands. He stood there for a moment with his head slightly bent, and she thought just for a second that she saw something move through his face that she had no word for, not grief, not relief, something older than both. The feeling of being found when you had stopped expecting to be. "I need to call Marsh," he said. "There's more," she said. "The hearing is scheduled, 10 days. Hale's attorneys have been notified of the archive document. Marsh says they may withdraw before the hearing if their client is rational." "Hale isn't rational," she said. "He's strategic, which means he'll look at the document, assess whether he can challenge its authenticity, and if he can't, he'll find another angle." Rhett looked at her. What angle? She had been thinking about this since she read the letter. "Us," she said. "If he can't win the land claim, he'll try to damage you personally enough that even winning feels like losing. He'll go after your reputation. He'll use the things he said at the hotel bar as a starting point and escalate." She paused. "He'll use me." "Then let him try," Rhett said. His voice was flat and certain. "It might get ugly." "I know what ugly looks like," he said. "I've been living in the aftermath of it for 12 years. He held her gaze. "Let him try." She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said. Hale's next move came not through the courts, but through a woman named Patricia Dean. She was the wife of the county commissioner, the same Hargrove who had eaten 2 servings of elk at their dinner. She was well-meaning, socially powerful, and had the particular vulnerability of a woman who has been told something in confidence, and believes she is doing a kindness by sharing it. She found Evelyn at the church fundraiser on Wednesday afternoon and took her gently by the arm to a quiet corner, and what she shared in the careful, pained voice of someone who thinks she is helping was that a letter had arrived at her husband's office the previous day, signed by a Missouri attorney describing a series of financial transactions related to the estate of a man named Robert Pierce, Evelyn's father. "I don't know the details," Mrs. Hargrove said. "My husband hasn't shown it to me, but he mentioned it was concerning. He said the man Hale sent it. He wanted my husband to know the full picture before the hearing." Evelyn kept her face completely still. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I don't know what's in it," Mrs. Hargrove repeated. "I just thought you should know." "I appreciate it," Evelyn said. "Truly." She drove home. She went directly to Rhett's office. She sat down across from him, and she said, "Hale has sent a letter to Commissioner Hargrove about my father's estate. I don't know the contents. I need to tell you everything about my father before you read it somewhere else." Rhett set down his pen. He folded his hands. He gave her his full attention. And she told him, all of it. The debt her father had accumulated in the last 3 years of his life. Honest debt borrowed against optimistic projections that didn't materialize, not fraud, not theft, just a man who believed too hard in the next season. The creditors who had been less than kind after his death. The legal proceedings that had dragged for 2 years while she and Thomas tried to hold together what was left. The way Hale had entered the situation, not as an enemy, but as someone offering to resolve it, and the way she had almost trusted him before she understood what he was actually doing. She told Rhett about the night she had signed documents under pressure that she later had reviewed by another attorney and been told were not what they had been represented as. She told him about the formal complaint she had filed, the one that had gone nowhere because Hale operated in the space between legal and ethical where complaints rarely stick. She told him everything. When she finished, the office was very quiet. Rhett had not moved while she spoke. He was still with his hands folded and his eyes on her face, and she could not entirely read what was in his expression, but she could see that he was listening fully and without judgment, in the way that some men are simply capable of, and many are not. "The documents he's sending Hargrove," he said. "What do you think they say?" "Something true made to look like something worse," she said. "He's good at that. The debt was real. The circumstances around it, how desperate we were, how many times I had to ask for extensions. The specific amounts in the right framing, it can be made to look like something other than what it was. Which was a daughter doing everything she could to protect what her father left behind." Her voice stayed even. That's all it was. Rhett unfolded his hands. He picked up his pen. He set it back down. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it clearly." She waited. "I have watched you work in this house for 6 weeks," he said. "I have watched how you treat people who work for me, how you handle information, how you respond when things are hard, and how you behave when you think no one is watching." He paused. "I know who you are. I don't need a letter from a Missouri attorney to tell me what kind of person sits across from me right now." She was very still. "Whatever Hargrove reads," Rhett said, "I will go to him myself, before the hearing. I will tell him what I know about you and how I know it. And it will carry more weight than anything Hale sends in an envelope, because I will be saying it face to face as a man who has worked beside you." He looked at her directly. "You are not alone in this." She had told Thomas the same thing 3 weeks ago. She had meant it then. Hearing it now from this man in this office, she understood for the first time what it felt like to receive the thing you had been offering to someone else. Her throat tightened, just briefly. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to." His voice was quiet. "That's why I'm doing it." She looked at her hands. She pressed them flat on the desk and breathed once and then looked up at him. "Rhett," she said, "I need to ask you something directly." "Ask. Are you—" She stopped. Started again. "When you look at this situation, Hale, the hearing what he's saying about me, are you pulling back from—" She could not quite finish the sentence, not because she didn't know the words, because she needed to hear what he said without the sentence already shaped. He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what it looks like?" he said. "I don't know. That's why I'm asking." He looked at the desk, at the letter from Marsh still open between them, at his own hands. "I'm not pulling back," he said slowly. I'm trying not to make a mistake." He looked up. "I have made mistakes before. Specifically, I have loved people and not been able to keep them safe. And the part of me that remembers that is it's loud right now." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I can hear it." His jaw tightened. "Evelyn, you don't have to say anything else," she said. "I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed to know it wasn't withdrawal, that it was fear, because fear I understand, fear I can work with." She looked at him steadily. "You can be afraid and still be here. Both things can be true." He looked at her for a long, long moment. Outside, the wind moved. Somewhere in the house, the clock ticked. "Yes," he said finally, quietly. They can. She nodded. She picked up her copy of Marsh's letter. Then let's prepare for the hearing, she said. Together. He picked up his pen. They worked until midnight, and neither of them said anything more about fear. But it was there between them, acknowledged now named, and set on the table, and naming a thing she had learned long ago is the first step toward no longer being ruled by it. She held on to that. She was going to need it for what was coming. The night before the hearing, Evelyn did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with every document they had assembled over the past 3 weeks spread in front of her. The archive letter, the title insurance certificate, the commissioner's 1874 response, Marsh's formal brief, her own annotated timeline of the Northern Corridor, Railroad Company's dissolution. And she went through all of it one final time. Not because she needed to. She had memorized every word, every date, every legal citation that Marsh had built into the defense. She went through it because sitting still was not something she knew how to do when something important was about to happen. Hetty appeared at 2 a.m. without being summoned, set a cup of coffee on the table without speaking, and went back to bed. Evelyn drank the coffee and kept working. At 3 o'clock she heard footsteps in the hall. She knew them by now, the particular weight and pace of Rhett Callahan moving through his own house, the sound of a man who has lived alone long enough that he no longer tries to be quiet because there was never anyone to disturb. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the documents spread across the table. He looked at her. "You should sleep," he said. "I will," she said. "Later." He came in. He sat down across from her, his chair, the one that had become his chair through the simple accumulation of evenings, and he looked at the papers without touching them. "Are we ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Marsh has everything he needs. The archive document is authenticated. The insurance certificate is filed with the court. The case is as strong as it can be." She paused. "The question is, what Hale does when he realizes he can't win on the legal merits. You think he'll try something at the hearing itself." "I think he'll try something before the hearing ends," she said. "He's not a man who accepts a closed door without trying the window first." Rhett looked at her across the table. "What do you need from me tomorrow?" The question was so direct and so simply meant that she had to take a moment before answering it. "Stay steady," she said. "Whatever he says about the land, about me, about anything, stay steady. Don't react publicly. Don't give him a visible wound to press on." She held his eyes. "He's going to look for the moment you break. That's what tomorrow is really about for him, not the law. The law is already lost for him. He wants to see you break." Rhett looked at her for a long moment. "And if he goes after you," he said. "Directly. In that room." She had thought about this. "Then I answer him. Clearly and publicly and with the truth." She folded her hands on top of the documents. "I have been afraid of Victor Hale for 2 years. I have been afraid of what he knows and what he might say and who he might say it to. And I have spent 6 weeks watching you build something real out of a situation that was not simple, and I am not going to let that fear cost you what you've built." She paused. "I'm done being afraid of him." Rhett did not say anything for a moment. Then, "Good." One word. But the way he said it, quiet and certain and without any softening, landed in her chest like something settling into its proper place. She looked back at her documents. They sat together at the kitchen table until 4 a.m. Not always speaking, sometimes just present in the same space with the shared weight of tomorrow between them. And it was the most honest companionship she had felt in longer than she could clearly remember. The Black Hollow Town Hall was full by 8 o'clock. Evelyn had expected interest. She had not entirely expected this, the rows of people that filled every seat and lined the back wall, the low collective hum of a community that understood something significant was being decided and had come to witness it. Ranchers she recognized from the surrounding land. Shopkeepers. The Reverend. Mrs. Albright seated in the 3rd row, with her hands folded and her expression saying she had already formed a view and was here to have it confirmed. Commissioner Hargrove presided from the front table flanked by the county land clerk and a circuit judge named Beaumont, who had ridden in from Helena specifically for the proceeding. Marsh sat at the respondent's table with Rhett on his left and Evelyn on Rhett's left, her notebook open, her pen ready. Haley sat across the room with two attorneys she did not recognize. Young men well dressed, the kind of lawyers who are hired for appearance as much as ability. Hale himself looked exactly as he always looked, composed, warm, faintly regretful, as if he wished the circumstances were different. He caught her eye when she sat down. She looked at him steadily, and looked away, first only because she had chosen to not, because he made her. Judge Beaumont called the proceeding to order. Marsh presented the defense in 40 minutes, clear, methodical, precise. The 1871 preemption filing, the 1873 withdrawal letter, the 1874 commissioner's acknowledgement, the title insurance certificate establishing Rhett's purchase as protected against exactly this category of claim. He laid it out the way a carpenter lays out a frame, each piece fitting the next, no gaps, no excess. When he finished, the room was quiet, in the way rooms go quiet, when something has been said that is very difficult to argue with. Hale's lead attorney stood. He was good. Evelyn gave him that. He moved carefully around the archive documents, suggesting not proving, but suggesting that the authentication process had been insufficient. He raised procedural questions about the insurance certificate's applicability. He was precise and polished, and he filled 40 minutes with language that sounded authoritative, but was, when you listened carefully, almost entirely without substance. Marsh dismantled it point by point in his rebuttal, without raising his voice once. By 11 o'clock, Evelyn could see it in the room, the shifting, the settling, the way people's bodies change when they have made up their minds. Hargrove's expression had moved from careful neutrality to something more resolved. Judge Beaumont had stopped taking notes and was simply listening, which meant he was no longer evaluating, he was concluding. And then Hale stood up. He did not wait to be recognized. He simply stood, and the room shifted its attention to him with the automatic reflex that certain men command, and he said in the warm and reasonable voice she knew so well, "Your Honor, with the court's indulgence, I believe there is a matter of context that is relevant to how this proceeding has been conducted." Judge Beaumont looked at him. "You'll address the court through counsel, Mr. Hale." "Of course." He sat down and leaned to his attorney and spoke briefly, and the attorney stood. "The claimant wishes to introduce a matter related to the respondent's household," the attorney said. "Specifically, information regarding the background of Mrs. Callahan that has direct bearing on the integrity of the defense's document preparation." Evelyn felt Rhett's hand under the table close briefly around her wrist. Not gripping, just there, present, steady. She kept her face forward. Marsh was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. The respondent's wife has no legal standing in this proceeding, and her personal history is entirely irrelevant to a land title dispute. We contend it speaks to the credibility of the defense's document sourcing," the attorney said smoothly. "Mrs. Callahan has previously been involved in a Missouri property proceeding in which documentation was challenged. The Missouri proceeding was resolved in the Pierce estate's favor," Marsh said. "If counsel has the record, he has that too." "What he has," the attorney continued, "is evidence that Mrs. Callahan was involved in a separate financial matter in which she signed documents under disputed circumstances." Evelyn stood up. The room went very still. Judge Beaumont looked at her. "Mrs. Callahan, you are not a party to this." "I understand, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was completely even. "And I apologize for the breach of procedure, but I would ask the court's latitude for 60 seconds because what counsel is about to introduce is something I would like to address directly and publicly, rather than allow to sit in this room as an unanswered implication." A pause. Beaumont looked at her, then at Marsh, then at Hargrove. Hargrove gave a small nod. 60 seconds, Beaumont said. She looked at the room, not at Hale. At the room, at Mrs. Albright and the Reverend and Cord standing against the back wall, and Thomas 3 rows back, with his hands folded and his jaw set and his eyes on her face. 2 years ago in Missouri, she said clearly, my father died with debt. Honest debt borrowed against a farming season that failed. Victor Hale's clients held a portion of that debt and filed a claim against the estate. The claim was contested, it was investigated, it was dismissed. She paused. During that proceeding, Mr. Hale approached me privately and suggested I sign a private settlement agreement that would have transferred the majority of my father's remaining assets to his clients in exchange for the claim being dropped. I declined. The documents counsel is referring to are drafts of that agreement, which I signed under the impression they were preliminary and non-binding, and which were subsequently reviewed by a separate attorney who confirmed they were in fact neither preliminary nor binding as Hale had represented them. She kept her voice steady. I filed a formal complaint. It was not pursued. What was pursued was the legal proceeding which we won. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. I came to Montana because my options in Missouri had been exhausted by 2 years of exactly this, the use of legal process, not as a tool of justice, but as a tool of pressure. I came here, and I have worked in this house and on this ranch, and everything I have done in that time is visible and documented and available to anyone in this room who wishes to examine it. She looked at Hale directly for the first time. And I would like to suggest to the court that the introduction of my personal history into a land title proceeding in which I have no legal standing is itself the clearest possible indication that the claimant's legal case has no remaining foundation. She sat down. The room did not make a sound. And then from the third row, Mrs. Albright began to clap, one measured, deliberate clap, the kind that is not applause, but endorsement. And 2 other people followed, and Beaumont let it run for exactly 3 seconds before he called for order. Rhett's hand was still around her wrist under the table. She could feel his pulse. Or maybe it was hers. Hale's attorney made 2 more attempts to redirect the proceeding. Beaumont shut both down inside a minute. Marsh's final statement took 7 minutes and ended with a precise, quiet request for immediate dismissal of the claim on the grounds of legal extinguishment, confirmed by authenticated historical record. Beaumont called a 30-minute recess to confer with Hargrove. They came back in 20. The claim was dismissed in its entirety. The room reacted not with chaos, but with the deep collective exhale of people who have been holding something and are now releasing it. Conversation started. Chairs moved. The Reverend leaned to the man beside him. Cord at the back wall closed his eyes briefly and opened them again. Thomas was across the room before Evelyn had fully processed that it was over, and he put both arms around her from the side in the way he had done since he was 7 years old, and she had been the person who made things all right. "You were extraordinary," he said into her shoulder. "I was accurate," she said. "That's the same thing with you." She held on to him for a moment, just a moment, and then straightened and looked for Rhett. He was standing 3 feet away, watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the controlled, evaluated attention she had grown used to. Not the contained warmth of their kitchen evenings. Something more exposed than either. Something that looked for the first time in all the weeks she had known him like a man who was not managing what he felt. He was just feeling it. "Rhett," she said. "Not here," he said quietly. She understood. There were people around them. Marsh shaking hands. Hargrove approaching to speak with Rhett. The room still full and loud with the release of tension. She nodded. She watched him turn to Hargrove with the composed, measured manner that was simply who he was in public, and she stood beside Thomas and waited. And the waiting was easier than it had ever been, because she knew with the same clarity that she knew numbers and patterns, and the truth in ledger columns, what was on the other side of it. Hale left Black Hollow that afternoon. She did not see him go. She was told by Cord, who had watched the carriage pull out from the hotel, with the particular satisfaction of a man who has been wanting something to leave for a long time. "He didn't say anything to anyone on his way out?" Evelyn asked. "Said something to his attorney," Cord said. "Attorney didn't look happy about it." A pause. "That's the best kind of leaving," she agreed. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Thomas drove the wagon ahead with 2 of the hands, and Evelyn sat beside Rhett on the second horse, her own horse, now the brown mare that had been shy when she arrived and was not shy anymore, and they rode without speaking for the first mile. She was not uncomfortable with the silence. She had not been uncomfortable with silence between them for weeks. But this silence was different from the working silences of the office and the kitchen. This one had weight to it, not the weight of unresolved things, but the weight of things that were about to be resolved, and both of them knew it. Rhett spoke first. "What you did in that room," he said. "It needed to be done. You didn't have to do it that way. Marsh could have objected," she said, "and the implication would have sat in that room anyway unaddressed. People don't remember sustained objections. They remember what was said." She kept her eyes on the road. "I wanted the truth in that room. All of it, publicly. So there was nothing left for him to use." A pause. "Were you afraid?" he said. "Yes." She didn't hesitate. "My hands were shaking under the table." "They didn't look it. I learned a long time ago to let my hands shake without letting my voice." He was quiet for a moment. "Who taught you that? Necessity," she said. "The same teacher as everything else." They rode another quarter-mile. The mountains were enormous and close in the afternoon light, and the ranch was visible in the middle distance, the solid, permanent, well-built shape of it against the landscape, the thing Rhett had built on the worst ground of his life. "I went to Hargrove this morning," Rhett said, "before the hearing." She looked at him. "I didn't know that." "I know you didn't." He kept his eyes forward. "I told him what I told you I would tell him, what I know about you, how I know it." He paused. "He told me at recess that it wasn't necessary, that he had already decided what he thought." What had he decided? That a woman who restructures accounts and fires dishonest employees and writes to insurance companies in the middle of the night on behalf of a ranch that isn't technically hers is not a woman who came here for ulterior purposes. A pause. His words. Something warm and complicated moved through her chest. "That was a kind thing for him to say," she said. "It was an accurate thing," Rhett said. "Same as what you told Thomas." She looked at him. He was still looking forward, but there was something in the line of his jaw. Not tension, the opposite of tension. The look of a man who has made a decision and is carrying it quietly until he can set it down in the right place. They reached the ranch. Hetty had made the elk again. Nobody had asked her to. She had simply decided that this was an occasion requiring elk, and she was not wrong. The kitchen smelled like something worth coming home to, and Thomas ate 2 plates and told Cord a story about the hearing that was slightly embellished but fundamentally accurate, and Cord listened with the patient attention of a man who had been worried and was now relieved and was allowing himself to show it. Evelyn ate and listened, and felt for the first time in longer than she could clearly account for the specific warmth of being in the right place. After supper, after Thomas and Cord had gone, and Hetty had retired, she stood at the kitchen counter and listened to the house settle around her, the sounds of a structure that had held for 12 years against Montana winters, and had every intention of continuing. Red appeared in the doorway. She turned. He was carrying the carved horse. He set it on the kitchen table, not as a dramatic gesture, not with ceremony, just setting it there between them, the way he had that midnight when she had found him, and neither of them had known what to say. But this time, he remained standing, and his face was entirely open in the way she had only glimpsed before the controlled surface fully set aside. "I need to say something to you," he said. "All right. I've been carrying the fear of this for 12 years. He looked at the horse. "That if I let myself care for someone again, I will lose them the same way. And the losing will be my fault because I wasn't enough to keep them safe." He paused. "That's not rational. I know it's not rational. But it's what's been running underneath everything for a long time." "I know," she said quietly. "When Hale came here, when he started using you as a target, the first thing I felt wasn't anger." He looked up. "It was the old fear. That I had brought someone into my life, and now she was in danger because of me. That I was going to fail to protect her the same way." He stopped. He breathed. "The same way I couldn't get back through that door." She did not look away from him. She let him say it. "And then I watched you stand up in that room today," he said, "with 100 people watching and that man waiting for you to crack, and you told the truth. Calmly. Completely. Without asking anyone to save you. He shook his head slowly. You don't need me to protect you, Evelyn. You never did. That's not entirely true, she said. He looked at her. I needed you to believe me, she said. When Hale said what he said about me, I needed you to look at 6 weeks of honest conduct and choose that over a man's whiskey bar story. She held his eyes. You did that. That was protection. The most important kind. He was very still. I'm afraid, he said, plainly, without softening it. I know. I'm afraid of wanting this. A pause. Of wanting you. Of what happens if... Rhett. Her voice was gentle but clear. I have been living in your house for 6 weeks. I have seen your worst days and your most controlled days and the midnight in between. I have watched you lose 2 men you trusted and rebuild the systems they damaged and ride out to your east fence at 4 in the morning because the work is the thing you use to hold yourself together. She stepped toward the table, toward him. I have seen your worst version. And I am still here, standing in your kitchen at 9 o'clock on the best day this ranch has had in years. She stopped a foot from him. The thing you're afraid of losing, I'm not going anywhere. His jaw moved. His hands at his sides closed briefly and opened. I can't promise nothing bad will happen, she said. I can't promise I'll always be safe or that the world will cooperate. No one can promise that. She looked at him steadily. What I can tell you is that I came here with a contract and a practical plan and no intention of feeling anything. And somewhere between the first ledger and the midnight kitchen, I stopped being able to pretend that what is happening between us is just convenience. She paused. That's the truth. You said you only deal in truth. So there it is. For a long moment he did not move. Then he reached across the table and picked up the carved horse. He held it for a moment, the way he always held it with both hands, with the particular tenderness of a person holding something irreplaceable. And then he set it down again gently, and he reached for her hand. Not dramatically, not with the sweep of a man in a story. Just his hand finding hers on the edge of the table and closing around it careful and certain the way he did everything. She did not pull away. She turned her hand over so their palms were together, and she held on. I don't know how to do this anymore, he said quietly. It's been a long time. I know, she said. We'll go slowly. You're not a patient woman, he said. Something moved in her chest. Something lighter than anything she'd felt in weeks. I'm patient about the things that matter, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. The almost smile she had catalogued over 6 weeks of evenings, the one that was rarer than most people's full laughter, and meant exactly as much. Clara would have liked you, he said. His voice was low and even, not broken, not performing grief, just saying a true thing. She felt the weight of it, the gift of it, and held it carefully. Tell me about her sometime, she said, when you're ready. All right, he said. They stood in the kitchen with their hands together and the carved horse on the table between them and the house quiet around them. And it was not a dramatic moment. It was not the kind of moment that announces itself as significant. It was just 2 people who had been through enough to know the difference between a performance of feeling and the real thing, choosing the real thing slowly and with their eyes open. 3 days later, Marsh wrote to confirm that Hale's legal group had formally withdrawn from all Montana filings and had dissolved their local representation. The land was Rhett's uncontested clear permanent. He read the letter at the kitchen table. He set it down. He looked at Evelyn across from him. It's done, he said. It's done, she said. A pause. The insurance company has acknowledged the certificate, she said. They'll cover Marsh's fees, which means the entire proceeding cost you nothing. He looked at her. How long have you known that? He said. Since yesterday, she said. I wanted to wait until the withdrawal was confirmed before I told you. No point in good news if the other news isn't finished. He shook his head, not in frustration. in that slow, private disbelief she had come to know. "Evelyn," he said, "I know. You are the most—" He stopped, looked for the right word. "Practical," she offered. "I was going to say remarkable," he said, "but practical is also true." She smiled, a real one, the kind she had not been giving this house for the first 3 weeks, and had been giving it more freely since. He stood up from the table. He came around to her side. He put his hand on her face, one hand rough and warm and careful, and he tilted her face up toward his, and he looked at her the way he had been looking at her for weeks without letting himself know it was what he was doing. "Stay," he said. "Not the contract, not the arrangement. Just that." "I'm already here," she said. He kissed her quietly, certainly without performance, and the clock on the mantel ticked, and outside the Montana morning was moving through its ordinary business of light and wind and the sounds of a working ranch that had been built by a man on the worst ground of his life and was still standing. Still standing and no longer standing alone. Thomas found out at breakfast. He looked at his sister's face, and then at Rhett's, and then back at his sister, and he picked up his fork and said very carefully, with the particular dignity of a 19-year-old who has learned when not to make a speech, "Good." Evelyn looked at him. "That's all?" "That's everything," Thomas said, and went back to his eggs. Hetty at the stove did not turn around, but her shoulders moved in a way that suggested she had been waiting for this particular morning for several weeks, and was satisfied that it had finally arrived. Cord was told by Rhett directly in the barn in 4 sentences. He responded with a handshake and then went back to his work. And the ranch went on, because that is what ranches do, what built things do, what real things do. And Evelyn Pierce, who had arrived in Black Hollow with a contract and a leather satchel and the specific kind of calm that comes from a woman who has already survived the worst thing she could imagine, sat at the kitchen table in the afternoon light and opened the new ledger she had ordered from Billings. She wrote the date at the top of the first page. She wrote the ranch's name. She wrote the opening balance, healthy, accurate, and entirely clean. And she thought, this is not the life she had planned. It was better. It was real, and it was earned, and it was hers. And she had not arrived at it by being saved, or by being lucky, but by being exactly who she was, in exactly the right place, with exactly enough courage to stay when staying was the hardest and most necessary thing. That was the whole story. 2 broken people, 1 honest house, and the stubborn, unglamorous, irreversible truth that some things, the best things, are not found. They are built.